All right, I'm going to get started here. If you are looking for the intro session on SIG Release, this is the one. So I am Tim Pepper. I work for VMware, and as of this last week, I'm now one of the chairs of SIG Release. And prior to that, I guess my claim to fame was I was the release team lead for the 112 release. I've also been involved in prior releases and am involved in the 113 release now as well. So yeah, with that introduction, I'll carry on. The agenda, what I want to cover for you today is go over a highlight of what is SIG Release, what do we do, and much of that is making the releases and the release process. So I'll go into that in more detail. And then also talk about the release lifecycle, because each release that we make doesn't just sort of stop there. It gets a period of support and lives beyond the few months where that is happening. And then I'll go into how we actually staff the production of the releases and talk about the release team and the individual roles and responsibilities on the team. And then from that, give you an idea of how you can become involved. There's opportunity here. We are trying to grow the size of our SIG and grow the Kubernetes community. And there's many opportunities here for newcomers to get engaged in this. So first then, what is SIG Release? So these are some phrases I copied out of the SIG charter. Like all of the other SIGs now, or increasingly, the SIGs are putting charter documents in the Kubernetes/community repository that describe formally what it is that the SIG does. So the primary overarching goal in my mind for SIG Release is that we're generating the Kubernetes releases on a reliable schedule with high quality. Now, as you get into the details of that, we have to ensure that we have a set of people who can do this. We need enough people to make sure that we can complete the releases on time, that we spot any quality problems and get them resolved, and then that this is sustainable, that from quarter to quarter as we make releases, we always have enough people to do this, and additionally then to support it for some period after the release. Then a key difference between the special interest groups and the working groups, or the committees within the Kubernetes organization, is that SIGs own code. So these first couple bullets are sort of talking about the process, how we produce some build artifacts, but we do that with tooling and with automation. And there the code is the responsibility of SIG Release. And finally, I kind of like to say that on the release team or in SIG Release, we don't do any real work, because often people think of real work as writing a whole bunch of code, implementing features, making bug fixes. But in terms of the broader software engineering lifecycle, what we do as engineers, writing code or fixing a bug is only a tiny part of the bigger picture of engineering. So all of the process and project management aspects that come into the bigger picture fall to us, where the work doing the features and the bug fixes, that comes from all of the other SIGs. So we partner with those SIGs. We work to make sure that they're empowered to get their features and bug fixes done and integrated into a release that goes out to users. So the process itself, I've sort of started to hint at this. We have a cycle, and it's basically 3 months or 4 times a year. And this corresponds currently to the quarters of the calendar year. Within that cycle, we have coarsely 3 things that we do. We start out deciding what do we aspire to put into this release. And once we've decided that, then we work on it for a while. And then we sort of draw the line, make sure that we have all the aspects of quality we need through bug fixing, and then we put out the release. But I want to highlight one recent change here. So I've talked a little bit in terms of features, but features the word in English to some people implies something kind of narrow. And we've wanted to use a word that's a little broader, that talks about making Kubernetes better. That could be a bug fix. It could be removing technical debt, refactoring code. Those are things maybe that aren't user visible and aren't something that people think of as a new feature, but they do make Kubernetes better. They enhance Kubernetes. So in addition to adding some new feature, there's these other things that also constitute enhancements. So we start out, and this kind of looks like a waterfall sort of process, but that's only here as a way to describe what we do. It's actually much more agile than this. All of the SIGs are always writing code, they're always fixing bugs, they're always talking about ideas on enhancements. But at the start of the cycle, what the release team really works to do is to talk to the SIGs and say, of all of your great ideas, what can we narrow down to as things that we can realistically accomplish in the next 3 months, and know that we have good testing and documentation and all the other things in order to make a solid release. So at some point, about 4 weeks in, we have what we now call the enhancements freeze, or previously known as feature freeze. From this point forward, we have a list, usually something like 40 or 60 things that we're expecting to come in terms of larger changes to the code base. And we'll start tracking those closely to ensure that they make a solid progression towards quality. At this point, the code base is just sort of a free-for-all. Everything and anything that's ready in an agile way is actually merging into the master branch. But the terms here, freeze and slush, sort of allude to that liquidity or water. Things are very fluid at first, but as we progress, we enter a period around week 7 or so where we fork a branch off of the master branch in Git that will become the release branch. And we enter a period called code slush, where this liquidity starts to get a little more friction, things slow down. We ask the SIGs to be merging less code and thinking deliberately in this period of these many things that were aspirations to complete for the release. Are they realistically going to make it, or perhaps not? And it's okay if not. In the agile, deferred commitment way, if not, we'll just move those forward to the next release and work can continue on them, but we won't target them for this release branch. Around week 8, we enter the code freeze. At this point, no new feature work or no new enhancement work should be coming in, only critical bug fixes. This gives us a short period of a couple weeks during which, on the release team, we can focus very much on the quality of the code, looking at the continuous integration tests and the automated test results, and ensure that all of the results are green and we're on track for a healthy release. As we start having the clear signs of healthy code in the release branch, we end the code freeze. We call this thaw, so a sort of springtime water melting term. And at that point, the master branch carries on to the next release. We may have a few more final bug fixes yet to get into the branch, and some last building and testing to do before we actually make the release where we publish the build artifacts. Now, this 3-month cycle is actually happening continually. And additionally, we have the idea of support. So this is sort of showing what the calendar year 2018 looked like. In the first quarter, we were doing exactly what I've just described for the 1.10 release. And at the point that it released in March, it entered a 9-month support phase where 1.10.x minor patch releases were being made. Things that were in master branch that are critical fixes get backported to 1.10 for users of that stable release. But in the meantime, the master branch is then under development for 1.11 from April to June. And we actually have the 1.11 release lead here in the room with us also, Josh Burkus, who was my mentor on the team, helping me become the 1.12 release lead. So that's going on in parallel, and then the 1.12 release, and as I finished helping get that release out the door with our team in September, The 1.13 release is started and is underway. Now, a key thing to understand here is that right now, the way we do our support is those critical back fixes in this 9-month period. We do those for 3 releases at a time. So right now, 1.12 is available. So it's one of the supported releases. 1.11 is also, and 1.10 is the third one. At the point that 1.13 is released in December, assuming that everything goes on schedule, 1.10 will fall out of support. And this cycle continues across the calendar from year to year. So to make that a little more concrete, talking about support. Our support streams get critical fixes backported to their released branches. This is done with a git cherry pick mechanism, and we have a basic expectation that the fix is in the master branch, and only at that point will we backport it. This ensures that master is always maximally healthy going forward. We do not backport features, and we don't have something, if you're familiar in other software projects, the concept of long-term support, where you may get multiple years of support on something and then be able to upgrade to the next thing. We don't do that. You actually have to upgrade from 1.10 to 1.11, from 1.11 to 1.12. So with this cadence of a release every 4 months and 9 months of support, as you're operating a cluster, you have to actually think about this release lifecycle and how you'll manage your clusters moving forward through the upgrade path. But what you get once you deploy a cluster is basically 9 months of support. Now, there is friction that we understand in the community. This is very rapid, and we want to improve operators' experience from a support perspective. So we've just started a working group called Working Group LTS, Long-Term Support, where we're going to initially do an investigation of what types of support people want and what types of problems they experience today, and brainstorm what we could do to make things better. Many of us don't want to do long-term support in the traditional sense of multi-year support and jumping across multiple years. One, it's technically very difficult, and two, it's kind of an anti-pattern relative to what we say cloud native is about, rapidly rolling forward your apps and this velocity of application deployment. It would be strange if we say Kubernetes is about deploying your apps fast, but we say you can't deploy your cluster fast and efficient. So we want to figure out a way to bridge these, and this may take some invention, because I don't know that there's major system software that advances as rapidly as Kubernetes does, but gives a solid user experience yet. So we may be the first. And tomorrow I'll be hosting a SIG Release deep dive on this topic if you'd like to attend. Now, the release team. So I was the lead of the release team for 1.12, which was the third quarter of this year. And this is a picture from the GitHub repository where we track our releases. And the first column you can see there is the role names, the people, the tasks on the team. The second column is the name of the person who was leading that particular role for the release. And then this third column is what we call shadows. To make sure that our community is growing and sustainable as we move through time, we try to ensure that every lead on the release team has a few set of shadows who they're training, they're mentoring, and then we hope that they will eventually step up to lead one of these roles themselves. So we're always growing the team and spreading the load, bringing in new ideas and new skilled users. And this actually happened. So my shadow on the 1.12 release, Aish Sundar, has stepped up to be the lead of the current 1.13 release. The others there where there's an arrow, a shadow has taken over the role from the lead. And you can see this then for 1.13 in the current quarter 4 of 2018. We have a set of leads again who are, some of them are prior participants in a release team, and some of them are shadows who've graduated up into a higher level of responsibility. So we're a volunteer set of leads, plus our shadows, who are sort of our trainees, And it's our responsibility to train these leads so they can eventually step up. And we meet regularly, and our job, like I said before, is to not do the actual work of all of the features in the release, but to sort of assess the status of the velocity and trajectory, the quality of the prospective release as we're aiming towards our release date, and weigh the risks that we're having. Do we have a large feature that's having lots of trouble in tests? Do we need to bring more focus to that, get more people working on it to solidify and fix it sooner? And then the way we do that is a whole bunch of meetings. We're constantly going out to the other SIGs to talk to them to say, hey, your code is causing a lot of test failures. How can we get some resolution on that? Pinging people on Slack, following issues and pull requests on GitHub, all across the repositories. And on any release right now, I think we have about 2,000 commits that come into the release. So that's a lot of things to watch and track, and this is why we need a large team. You have a lot of puzzle pieces, and we're sort of there watching and trying to bring it all together to make a coherent picture. One of the things that happens within this is that it can almost at times be frustrating. For things that are working, everything's great and we don't have to pay too much attention to it. But for things that are a problem on the path to this release, we're always looking at those. So to sort of counter the focus that we have to give to things that have problems and not be drawn into negativity, as a team we try to have a lot of fun. We're, I think, known on Slack as one of the top 2 users of emoji in the Kubernetes project. So we just try to keep things a little light, and I think this also makes it easy for newcomers who are interested in joining the team as a shadow trainee. It's not that we're not serious, we take it very seriously what we do, but we try to be positive as we do it. So to talk then a little bit about the specific roles that were in the chart there, and keeping the cat analogy going, as the release team lead, I was the cat herder in chief. All these other cats I had to hold in my arms and help bring somewhere together. And also the worrier in chief. I had to watch for any potential problems and try to take things and put them back on track. But it's relatively easy to do that in the end because you have a team of people supporting you. And in addition to Josh, a past lead and a current member on the release team, we also have Noah and Yang Li here who are past contributors and present contributors on release teams as well. And as a release team, we rely on the people in each of these roles to support us. The enhancements lead is basically a project manager who goes out to the SIGs and understands all of the work they have in flight, tries to then capture it as a list and make sure that all of the things that it needs, testing and documentation, are sufficiently planned out, that there are people working on the code so that we know and have confidence it will be done on time. Our CI signal lead, currently Josh for this release, they watch our test infrastructure, all of the outputs of the test infrastructure, all of our automated tests that are running thousands and thousands of times a day and on all of the commits that come in, watching those to see, are we healthy or do we have failures? And where we have failures, bringing forces to bear to fix the problems. Our test infrastructure lead actually owns the underlying mechanisms, making sure that our testing resources are healthy. We can have the perception of the code base being unstable when it's actually the hosting of the test platform being unstable. And that can be a full-time job in itself. They also manage the mechanisms around which we enforce code slush and code freeze, branching, building. We have a role for bug triage. CI signal is more focused on the automated tests, but anybody in the world in our community could run Kubernetes or run our pending release code and discover a flaw, and they would then open an issue in GitHub. We need to see that and get focus on it to resolve it. So our bug triage lead manages tracking new incoming bugs, associating them to PRs, and getting the right people working on fixing. We have a branch manager. This is the person specifically who does the Git operations around branching and pulling things from master back to a release branch, leading up to release. The patch release manager at the bottom, post-release, they're doing a similar task. They're pulling patches back from Git master into the release branch, and then also triggering the automation that does a build, ensuring that the automated quality affirms that it's a successful and quality build. We then also have these documentation, release notes, and communication roles. As I alluded to earlier, these are a critical part of software engineering. You can't just write code, you also have to write documentation. The documentation needs internationalized for folks in China to be able to read more easily. When the release comes out, there has to be a set of release notes that tells a prospective consumer what to expect. Are there awesome new features? Are there maybe known bugs that will be fixed very soon but were part of the release still? Are there features that were deprecated or that graduated from alpha to beta or from beta to stable GA? And then communications as well. For each of these major releases on a project the size and scale of Kubernetes, the newspapers and the bloggers of the world and the podcasters, they want to know what's in the release. And it's actually a full-time job with the Shadows as a sub-team just to talk to all of these different media resources, let them know what's coming, let them know what's shipped. And again, that's an art in itself. It's different than writing code, but it's a part of our process, and we have people who focus on it. One of my sort of points of pride in the 1.12 release was to take these roles, many of which had very little documentation on what the role or responsibility was, and drive towards better documenting them. So we now have a set of release team role handbooks out on Git. And if any of the stuff that I've talked about today sounds at all interesting or matches any of your skills, I'd encourage you to take a look at these, read through them, and come to our SIG and ask questions. Attend our release team meetings and our SIG release meetings and learn about these roles and how we operationally make the releases. It's a great opportunity to get involved in the project and become a contributor. One of the really cool things about being involved in the release team is it spans everything. If you're just a networking person, probably you're going to go work in SIG networking. If you're just a storage person, SIG storage. But for many of us, we're interested in a lot of different things, or as a newcomer, we don't know quite where we fit. And because the release team spans everything, it's a great place to start orienting to the broader project. And if you've got general software engineering skills, project management skills, are good at documentation, are bilingual, it's a great opportunity to make a concrete contribution to the project and start to get yourself noticed and maybe find your passion. And then when you engage with the SIG that you're interested in, the people there already know you and welcome you because they've seen your contributions. So some things are coming soon out of SIG Release. We've struggled in the past on having enough people to do all of the things that we want to do. Many SIGs have sub-projects beneath them. And realistically, each release team, so the 1.12 release team, the 1.13, the 1.10 release team, each of these was a sub-project that existed basically for three months. And then there was another one, and then there was another one. But there's other things we need, like release engineering and automation around build tooling. In the release team, there wasn't a role specifically for that. And it's an area where our code has actually languished to some extent. We need more people to be involved in a sub-project that works on bettering those tools. And we'd like to have a release engineering sub-project. We also have some ongoing issues around licensing that could use better automation. And there, again, we need to write down what we need, formalize it as a sub-project, make it easy for people to then volunteer, get involved. Similar for security and provenance within the release. We need to have signed build artifacts so that people can download them and know that they have integrity, know where the artifacts came from, that they're trustworthy. Secure release engineering is a large task in itself, and again, we could use skilled folks getting involved on that. And then as mentioned, the whole concept of support. How do we do better support? And the new working group, long-term support, which SIG Release has sponsored. So all of this is sort of my call to you to consider getting involved in SIG Release. We're more than just writing feature code or bug fixes in Go. It's about release engineering. There's a component of marketing, documentation, testing, project management, communication, a lot of other skills. And I really passionately believe that individual engineers who learn more of these skills become better engineers. So these aren't just what people sometimes call soft skills. I often get challenged. People say, oh, you're just doing the release stuff. Are you technical? Well, yes, I am. And the more you do this, the more you are able to be a solid engineer. So I see this as a window of opportunity, and I would encourage newcomers to think of it that way and consider getting involved with us. And with that, that's my presentation. And if you have questions, I'd love to hear them. The microphone, or I can repeat the... Yep.
Has the long-term, okay, so for the patch release manager, it seems like they have essentially a 9-month commitment after the release goes out. So has that 9-month ever been a problem? Or like, is there like a rotation that might...
Yeah, that's a very good observation there. So we had one person in the list that is the patch manager, where these other roles had shadows, and the shadows are graduating to help. It hasn't exactly been a problem in the past, but we recognize that it has the potential to become a problem. If for no other reason, I really believe that as the Kubernetes project grows, gets more usage, more attention, some of that attention comes from black hat security researchers trying to break the system. They will find bugs that are security holes. Those bugs will need backported. And on any other large project like this, the number of those bugs and patches is just a rapidly increasing curve. That means a rapidly increasing amount of work for those patch managers. And for that reason, actually, I volunteered to be one of the patch managers for the 1.13 release. And my goal through the first 9 months of 2019, supporting 1.13 as patch manager, is to do it as a team. We have 2 leads instead of 1, and we do have a set of shadows. And what we're aiming to do is make it a collective team effort so that it's not just on the back of one person. And then hopefully that team also starts to cover more of the releases instead of having one individual in parallel with another individual for 9 months each, that we have a team that gives better continuity across the years that we expect Kubernetes to be successful. Again, a great opportunity for folks to get involved. Any other questions?
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
I'm not familiar with the long-term support process, so I wonder how to do when some critical bugs are found in a long-term support version. What should the SIG release do, and what should the users do? Thanks.
Today, in Kubernetes, we're all in trouble. We don't have an answer to that. But we can look to other software projects. So for example, both the Linux kernel and many Linux distributions have this model of long-term support. So the Linux kernel, for example, has multiple prior releases that are designated long-term support. And they get multiple years of patches being backported. Now, from a kernel perspective, it's a little bit easier, because one aspect of support is if you stay here on this one major release with minor bug patches, how do you 2 years later move to the next one? That upgrade path is a key part of support. For the Linux kernel, it's so mature now, and there's a clear separation between kernel space and user space, and a set of well-known syscalls, and POSIX has been a set of interfaces for decades now. There's enough stability there that a user can, at some point, install a new kernel, reboot, and expect that everything just works fine. Today, if you wait 2 years and just replace your Kubernetes control plane with a new Kubernetes control plane, things are going to be completely broken. So we as a group, as a community, somehow need to understand what the equivalent APIs are and drive them to higher quality and stability to where you get something like the kernel user space boundary and well-known syscalls and the famous Linux kernel mantra that we will never break user space. In Kubernetes, it's maybe less clear what is user space when you have CRDs and can dynamically change the control plane. So there's a lot of thinking and discussing to do there. And then the other example, Linux distributions, the example I would give there would be Ubuntu. You have the 1604 build that was LTS, and then 2 years later, 1804. And you can upgrade from one to the next. And again, you're relatively safe in doing that, perhaps, because of the stability and the maturity of the broader Linux ecosystem. In Cloud Native, we need to get there. There's a huge amount of opportunity to drive that type of change and stabilizing and maturing all of what we do. We're certainly not there yet. So this is an aspiration. And again, I hope to spend most of the talk tomorrow discussing this with a set of users and operators. And we'll be collecting information, doing surveys, discussing over the coming year to try to drive some concrete actions to improve where we are in supportability in the project.
Okay, thanks, Tim.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I thank you all for coming. If you have any additional questions in the future or are interested in getting involved, I really encourage you to join our Slack channel, SIG Release. Join our SIG Release meetings and the release team meetings. These are all, there's information on how to get connected to these in the standard Kubernetes community documentation places. And we would love to have your involvement in improving the release engineering of the project. Thank you.